At a high-profile charity gala, my husband sought to publicly shame me. He introduced a novelty item for the auction, a dinner date with his uninteresting spouse. The opening bid was set at a mere $1. Just then, an unexpected figure rose from the rear of the room. Jasmine felt a profound weight settle upon her spirit, a sensation far removed from the opulent, perfectly tailored gown she wore. It stemmed from a persistent unease that had shadowed her all morning, a feeling akin to standing on fragile ice, poised to fracture under an immense, unspoken pressure accumulated over 7 silent years. This gnawing sense of hollowness and betrayal had become her constant companion, an ethereal shadow that clung to her even in the most luminous moments. The dress itself, a bespoke creation in midnight blue velvet, was Sterling's selection, not for its flattering effect on her, but as the ideal, subdued canvas to accentuate his own dazzling persona. She was merely the subdued, dark pedestal designed to elevate his golden ego. The charity auction, an annual affair where his firm Vanguard Equity Solutions, VES, convened the city's elite, had always felt less like a celebration and more like a mandatory obligation to her. Seated at her table, the rich fabric of the dress seemed to constrict her. She watched Sterling, her husband. She didn't see the charismatic executive others admired, but a performer whose authentic self only flickered for her. "He's nothing but a fabrication," a cold inner voice whispered to Jasmine, "and you provided him with the blueprints for that elaborate deception." He circulated among the guests like a vibrant, fluttering butterfly, engaging in effortless banter, shaking hands and bestowing superficial compliments upon the ladies. His smile was as expansive as his boundless ambition, a glint of avarice and ice visible in his eyes. He was a polished, flawless specimen for the public, yet at home he transformed into a void, draining her of all vitality. Jasmine observed him captivating the attention of senior executives, a relentless pursuit of the spotlight, and she understood the familiar pattern. Hollow victories built upon her unacknowledged foundation. His triumphs were their unspoken, bitter secret. All the brilliant reports, intricate financial models, and strategic analyses he so dramatically presented in meetings had passed through her hands. Sleepless nights dedicated to poring over data and calculations were her burden, while he consistently claimed the accolades. This was the bitter price of their union. She voiced no complaints, nor did she seek acknowledgement. Her deep, unreserved love for Sterling had once sufficed as her sole reward, or had it only appeared that way? In truth, it had been the dread of insignificance, the terror of existing outside his shadow, a deeply ingrained insecurity from her youth. Her own father, a brilliant yet consistently unsuccessful history professor, had instilled in her, "Jasmine, the world forgets raw talent, but it venerates the appearance of success. Be astute, but allow others to shine if you wish to endure." This dictum had become her guiding principle. She had relinquished her own brilliance to Sterling, believing it would ensure their shared prosperity. She had extinguished her own light so that his might burn brighter. Now, gazing at his radiant, frigid countenance, Jasmine felt only an immense void, an endless expanse within her chest. She resolved to shatter this unspoken contract. The contemplation of an impending separation, the daunting task of reconstructing her life, felt overwhelming. The ballroom buzzed with a cacophony of voices, the chime of glasses and subdued music, creating an ambiance of light-hearted merriment and ostentatious, almost vulgar wealth. The sorrow Jasmine carried was rooted in 7 years of silence, years during which she had suppressed her own voice, her simmering fury within the sterile confines of their home. She recalled her modest, somewhat neglected garden, where she had once envisioned constructing a private sanctuary and establishing her own analytical space to finally pen a book on macroeconomics. She had even conceived of the title, The Silent Architecture of the Market. The book was intended as her reclamation of recognition, a monument to her stifled intellect. But Sterling had dismissed it with a laugh, that loud, condescending sound that left no room for dreams, that doused nascent hopes with toxic derision. A book, Jazz? Don't be so childish. You're my bedrock, my invisible intellect. Who else will safeguard my career? Who else will make the numbers dance if not you, my dull Jasmine? He had declared. In his eyes there was not a flicker of shame, only the naked, possessive demand of an owner. Instead, he had transformed her intended sanctuary into a gaudy, wet bar for his business associates, a space reeking of cheap victories and expensive scotch, a testament to his ego. That unfulfilled promise, that abandoned dream, lingered like a wilting rose in her heart. Only her elderly neighbour, Miss Lois Jones, who meticulously cared for her small garden and whose windows overlooked their property, had witnessed Jasmine's secret tears beneath the shadow of the magnolia tree. Miss Jones, a woman in her 80s with hands that carried the scent of earth and authenticity, was the sole genuine soul in Jasmine's sterile existence. She was the unvarnished voice of nature against the artifice of the financial world. You know, dear girl, Miss Jones had once said, her voice raspy yet warm, as she handed Jasmine a mug of robust chamomile tea. The tea tasted of the herbs she cultivated herself, a stark contrast to the polished surfaces of Sterling's world. You can't perpetually tread on withered blossoms, but you can remove them to make space for new growth in the garden. Life is much like my rose garden. It doesn't thrive on stagnant affection. It requires cultivation or a decisive pruning. Sterling, she continued, he's a nettle, Jasmine. He encroaches on your space and saps your light. Sever him before he overwhelms you. Looking at Jasmine's pensive face, Miss Jones added, I once had a cactus. It never bloomed because I kept it in too small a pot and refused to acknowledge it needed a larger one. Sterling is doing the very same thing to you. These simple yet profound words now resonated deeply within Jasmine. Sterling approached her table, his face alight with anticipation and self-satisfaction, radiating a blend of expensive cologne and unbridled ambition. Everything is going swimmingly, my Jazz. Our division has secured the highest amount of donations, he murmured, leaning in, his gaze already scanning the room, ensuring his presence was noted. That's wonderful, Sterling, she replied, her voice devoid of warmth, a strained smile gracing her lips. Yes, indeed, and I've conceived of a surprise for the auction, he announced, his tone boastful and self-congratulatory, the pronouncement of a man utterly convinced of his captivating power. She already anticipated that such surprises invariably led to embarrassment, if not outright humiliation. But this time, she sensed a different outcome, the prelude to her public undoing. Yet the capacity to intervene had long since deserted her, replaced by a deep-seated apathy. The resignation of surrender burrowed into her very bones. The auctioneer declared the commencement of the main bidding segment, a succession of desirable items, rare vintages, exclusive travel packages, coveted artworks, passed across the stage. Sterling repeatedly raised his paddle, a conspicuous display of his magnanimity, until it was time for his anticipated surprise. He confidently ascended the stage, taking the microphone from the auctioneer. The brilliance of the stage light seemed to erase any imperfections in his character. His crisp white shirt appeared like a suit of gleaming armor, unblemished and provocative. The room hushed in anticipation of another pronouncement from the successful executive. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling began, his voice resonating loud and clear, "I wish to present a truly exceptional lot. It is not purely material, but I am certain it will prove immensely appealing to those in pursuit of novel experiences. Something truly unique." He paused for dramatic effect, his gaze sweeping the room, seeking validation of his irresistible charm. He revelled in the expectant silence he had orchestrated. Jasmine felt an icy chill creep down her spine. She knew what was coming, the final blow to their marital facade, a strike more potent than any physical pain, aimed directly at her deepest vulnerability, her yearning for recognition. She fixated her eyes on a point on the dark, polished floor, inhaling the faint aroma of aged wax and chilled champagne. "Well, I now present to you lot number 27, Sterling proclaimed, dramatically pointing towards her table. His finger was an accusation. "Dinner with my very dull wife." His words dripped not just with irony, but with overt, cruel mockery. The entire room momentarily froze, then erupted in a wave of booming laughter. Sterling beamed, gratified by the effect, as if he had just delivered the wittiest line of his life. He inclined his head, anticipating a thunderous ovation for his audacious jest. Jasmine felt the blood surge to her face, only to recede instantaneously, leaving an icy emptiness. Dull wife. The humiliation was absolute. She felt hundreds of eyes trained upon her table, where she sat hunched, a defeated warrior. The laughter intensified, swelling into an approving, deafening chorus of ridicule, an echo of his own cruel words. It sounded in her ears like the shattering of the ice floe upon which she had stood for years. She observed the veiled schadenfreude in the eyes of women who had always seen her as Sterling's rival, and the disdain in the glances of men who condemned Sterling for his poor taste. Even the corporate leadership seated at the central tables offered smiles. No one perceived any impropriety, merely a humorous, albeit somewhat reckless, jest. Sterling basked on stage in the glow of the collective derision directed at her. "Opening bid, gentlemen, a mere $1, Sterling chanted, his voice tinged with a subtle scorn. Jasmine squeezed her eyes shut. The impulse to meld with the floor, to dissolve entirely, was overwhelming. Her hands trembled, her heart pounded a frantic, panicked rhythm. This was more agonizing than all the sleepless nights, more devastating than all the credit he had pilfered for her work. It was a public immolation, a presentation of her as something worthless, tedious, an object bartered for a token sum to inflate Sterling's own perceived value. "Oh, $1. Does no one wish to spend an evening with such an intellectual conversationalist who so wonderfully prepared my papers?" Sterling continued, his jokes growing increasingly superficial and inappropriate. The air in the room thickened, growing hot, the scent of apprehension mingling with the ladies' perfumes. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Her throat constricted as if caught in an invisible noose. Beneath the table, Jasmine clenched her fists, her fingernails digging into her palms. She felt no physical pain, only a searing rage, cold, pure, and all-consuming. This marked the end of her forbearance, the cessation of her blind devotion. He must fall, she thought, with a clarity that eased her breathing. He must suffer the same humiliation I am enduring now. This is no longer about divorce. This is my retribution. In that instant, something within her fractured, not like a delicate thread, but like a thick, rusted cable connecting her to this man and this life. $5, someone called out from the crowd. $10, another shouted, and the voices coalesced into a mocking choir. Jasmine met Sterling's gaze. He looked back at her, but there was no hint of remorse in his eyes only triumph, the taste of victory. It became unequivocally clear to her that she had always been merely a backdrop for him, a convenient instrument, an object to be ridiculed to amplify his own significance. Suddenly the laughter ceased. The room fell into a profound silence, so dense one could discern the attendees' very breaths. From the rear sections, occupied by the truly influential, unapproachable, and specially invited guests, a tall, imposing man arose. He was clad in an impeccably tailored dark grey suit that seemed to absorb the light, underscoring his inherent authority. His posture was regal, his gaze sharp, cool, and penetrating. It was Dr. Silas Thorne, recognized in business circles as the architect, a preeminent headhunter capable of identifying and securing any talent for any corporation by expertly reshaping careers. His presence at the auction was both unexpected and an honor to the event. $100,000, his voice boomed, clear and distinct as thunder in the stunned silence. The sum was staggering. The number acted as a physical force, quashing the nascent mockery. The room was utterly still. No one had anticipated such a dramatic turn of events. Sterling, on stage, appeared utterly flabbergasted. His smug smile had vanished, his mouth slightly agape. The silence seemed to steal his breath. Dr. Thorne proceeded with a slow, almost majestic stride down the aisle, his gaze locked resolutely on Jasmine. Each step was imbued with dignity and unshakable self-assurance. The very atmosphere around him crackled with impalpable energy. He moved with the controlled composure of a hunter, certain of his quarry's inability to escape. He stopped at Jasmine's table, extended his hand towards her, and in a deep, resonant tone inquired, "Pardon me, Mrs. Vance, Dr. Thorne." Jasmine looked up at him. There was no trace of pity in his eyes, no curiosity, only profound respect and an unobtrusive understanding. It was as if he had perceived not just her work, but her entire suppressed existence, and had precisely calculated her true market worth. As if in a dream, she placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was firm and cool, yet not uncomfortably so. He assisted her to her feet. Aware of the multitude of eyes upon her, Jasmine stood taller. The icy rage within her subsided, yielding to a sharp, merciless realization. She was no longer a mere commodity, but a valuable asset whose price had just escalated from $1 to "Such talent should not be squandered," Dr. Thorne declared loudly, his gaze fixed on Sterling, who remained on stage, mouth agape, still clutching the microphone. "I am bidding here not solely for dinner, ladies and gentlemen, but for the intellectual integrity and the invaluable labor that this gentleman has just auctioned off for a single $1." His words were directed at the entire assembly, yet only Jasmine grasped their profound, devastating implication. This was never about a mere dinner. It was about her immeasurable worth, a worth Sterling had carelessly devalued to a mere $1. A few weeks prior, when despair had become her constant companion, when every success Sterling claimed as his own reverberated within her soul as a piercing injustice, Jasmine had made a decision. In a surge of desperation and a faint hope for something better, she had compiled all her work, every report, presentation, and analytical assessment she had prepared for Sterling, including those he had dismissively deemed too complex, and dispatched them to Dr. Thorne, whose reputation as a talent scout she knew. It was her silent plea for justice, a message in a bottle cast into the vast ocean of the business world. She hadn't anticipated a response. It was more an act of final self-preservation. But a reply had materialized, and now he stood before her, a rescuer from this mortifying ordeal, a savior who had priced her dignity at a figure that dwarfed Sterling's entire career. She had cast her own lifeline, and he had grasped it. Dr. Thorne gently but firmly guided her towards the exit. The room remained silent, uncertain how to process this unexpected turn. Sterling stood speechless, immobile, staring after the departing Jasmine as if witnessing a phantom embodying his own impending downfall. "We will discuss matters tomorrow morning," Dr. Thorne stated softly as they departed. "Your resignation has already been drafted. You simply need to sign it. This will be the final instance of humiliation you endure." He added, "An exceptional opportunity awaits you, Mrs. Vance, a life where you are no longer a dull wife, but the architect of your own success." Jasmine simply nodded, rendered speechless. A colossal stony burden lifted from her shoulders. The expensive fabric of her dress now felt as light as a feather. This was not merely a walk out of the ballroom. It was an irrevocable departure from her former existence, an act of liberation. Outside, a crisp, cool autumn breeze swept through, dispelling the stale aroma of wealth and vanity from her lungs. She inhaled deeply. The air smelled of rain and nascent beginnings, of freedom and damp earth. She entered Dr. Thorne's automobile, its interior perfumed with leather and efficient coolness. She did not cast a backward glance at the brightly lit window of the ballroom, the site of her former confinement. The following morning, Jasmine did not sleep. She meticulously packed her belongings, her wardrobe, her cherished analytical texts, and, most importantly, the meticulously collected notes that illuminated the disarray within Sterling's systems, the very key to his inevitable collapse. Sterling, meanwhile, remained asleep, lost in a careless, almost childlike slumber, seemingly oblivious to the fact that the previous evening had marked an irreversible turning point. In the pre-dawn light, as the first faint grey rays filtered through the bedroom window, Jasmine observed his face. It was the countenance of a man who had exploited her for years. No sentimentality, no flicker of past affection stirred within her, only the cold, unadulterated rage that had hardened into unyielding resolve in her heart. She noted the subtle lines of arrogance etched around his mouth, lines she had once misinterpreted as signs of his strength. Now she perceived only weakness, the hubris of a man who believed he could defy natural laws. Jasmine penned a brief letter of resignation and placed it alongside a personal note on the living room table. The letter contained but one sentence, borrowed from Miss Jones. "I am pruning the nettle to make room for new growth in the garden. The payment for my sacrifice is now due, Sterling." She did not wait for him to awaken. She departed the house, its walls having served as her prison for years, without a backward glance, without a sound to betray her exit. The dawn greeted her with the metallic scent of wet asphalt and the promise of a fresh start. When Dr. Thorne met her at a charming, sophisticated cafe in Midtown Manhattan, Jasmine felt a surprising sense of calm, almost detached composure. A subtle, professional smile played on his lips, yet his eyes conveyed seriousness and keen business acumen. She immediately recognized him as someone who valued not only sentiment, but also performance and integrity. He carried a light scent of bergamot, sharp and clear, a stark contrast to Sterling's heavy, cloying cologne. Dr. Thorne exuded the aroma of truth, Sterling the scent of illusion. "Have you made your decision, Mrs. Vance?" he inquired, handing her a menu. "I have resigned," she replied crisply, the words sounding like a definitive judgment on her past life. For the first time in years, she felt free from the need to hide behind anyone, to choose her words with painstaking care to avoid offending anyone's vanity. The freedom to hear her own voice, now clear and steady, was breathtaking. "Excellent." Dr. Thorne nodded, his gaze sweeping across her face, pausing momentarily on the resolve in her eyes. He appeared to be assessing not only her professional capabilities, but also her internal readiness for radical transformation. her capacity for rebirth. You have ignited Mrs. Vance, and that is a powerful motivator. I have already conferred with the management of Crestwood Capital Group, CCG. They are extremely interested in your experience and, shall we say, your unique insights. The position is Senior Lead Analyst. We will be establishing a completely new division under your direction. You will have complete autonomy, access to resources, a salary commensurate with your contributions that triples your current earnings, along with performance-based bonuses and, of course, full acknowledgement of your achievements. No more dull wives and $1 bids. The final phrase was uttered not with the slightest hint of mockery, but with a profound sense of understanding and respect. Jasmine felt a profound internal shift, as if the ice encasing her soul was fracturing and melting away. For the first time in a considerable period, she felt valued not as an appendage to someone else, but as an independent individual, a top-tier professional. "I accept," she responded, her voice imbued with a steely resolve she hadn't anticipated in herself. This was more than just an acceptance. It was a declaration of her right to a dignified life and a fulfilling career. Retribution would merely be a byproduct of her assent. "Wonderful," Dr. Thorne affirmed, taking a sip of his coffee. "You can commence immediately if you wish. Your workspace has already been prepared. And by the way, Mr. Theodore Harrison, the chief executive, is relying heavily on your assistance with a sensitive undertaking. Vanguard Equity Solutions, your former associates. They are presently engaged in a vigorous competition for two substantial agricultural enterprises, Golden Harvest Farms and Heartland AgriCorp. These entities represent our primary rivals within that market segment, and they maintain a tenacious hold over those clients. Your insights into their operations would be exceptionally beneficial." A glint of amusement danced in his eyes, and Jasmine recognized that her retribution would be not only satisfying, but also highly lucrative. Jasmine offered a smile devoid of warmth, her expression reflecting unyielding resolve. She possessed intimate knowledge of these clients, understanding their requirements, vulnerabilities, and unmet needs, as she had been the one to compile the detailed reports and proposals that Sterling later presented with ostentatious confidence, making only minor alterations to the wording. The edifice of his professional standing now rested precariously in her hands, poised for dismantling. Her initial days at Crestwood Capital Group felt akin to immersing oneself in the refreshing clarity of the ocean after enduring years in a stifling, overheated chamber. Her new workspace was a monument to efficiency, minimalist in design with expansive glass elements, offering a sweeping panorama of the harbour where colossal vessels lay anchored, a potent symbol of the vast world of opportunities. She relished the pristine environment, infused with the subtle aroma of fresh paint and gleaming wood. The oppressive atmosphere of Sterling's ego was conspicuously absent, as was any trace of his overpowering cologne. Here, her own performance was the sole focus. Dr. Thorne, who emerged as a genuine mentor, not only guided her through her responsibilities, but also encouraged her aspirations. "You possess a remarkable aptitude, Mrs. Vance," he remarked during a consultation where she had presented a sophisticated risk analysis. "You perceive beyond mere figures. You discern the individuals behind them and the errors stemming from arrogance and complacency. Leverage that understanding. View it not as vengeance, but as equitable recompense for your stifled creativity. You are merely reclaiming what was unjustly taken." This philosophy of achieving restitution through exceptional performance became Jasmine's guiding principle. She recalled every unfulfilled request, every complaint regarding bureaucratic delays and inertia at Vanguard Equity Solutions, every missed opportunity, and every sigh of disappointment that Sterling had conveniently overlooked to preserve his tranquility. She understood that the agricultural holdings sought more than just financial services. They desired a partner cognizant of their seasonal cycles, their plans for modernization and expansion, and their specific requirements for farm equipment and fertilizers. Sterling had dismissed the intricacies of rural commerce. Jasmine, however, foresaw a significant opportunity. "I have formulated several strategic proposals, Dr. Thorne," she stated, her voice resonating with cool assurance. "V's is excessively rigid and too preoccupied with its conventional methodologies to grasp their genuine needs. They proffer generic solutions, whereas Golden Harvest Farms and Heartland Agricorp have long sought a personalized approach, more accommodating credit arrangements, and, crucially, inventive investment strategies that their current providers are incapable of delivering. We can offer them not merely financial services, but a comprehensive development blueprint, enabling them to achieve a new echelon, streamline expenditures, and amplify profitability. If you are finding Jasmine's narrative engaging, kindly signify your appreciation by liking this content. It significantly aids engaging reader interest. And for those who relish similar narratives, ensure you subscribe to Betty's Stories to access further installments. Now let us resume. Jasmine's profound transformation is only now commencing. The following day, to the astonishment of her colleagues at Vanguard Equity Solutions, Jasmine's initial destination was the Human Resources Department. "Mrs. Vance, do you require assistance?" inquired the HR director, Ms. Renee Jackson, her expression betraying palpable surprise at the early hour of Jasmine's visit. A mixture of curiosity and mild apprehension was evident in her demeanor. She clutched a lavender stress ball, attempting to mitigate the pervasive tension within Sterling's division. "I have submitted my resignation," Jasmine declared with firm resolve, presenting a folded document. Her countenance betrayed no hint of hesitation, only the serene certainty of absolute conviction. Miss Jackson accepted the paper, perused its contents, and her eyebrows ascended in astonishment. "But why? You are an indispensable member of our team, and Mr. Vance relies on your contributions. The quarterly report is imminent. You are aware of this. We are utterly incapacitated without you." Sincere concern for the organization rather than for Sterling was palpable in her tone. "I request that the necessary administrative procedures be expedited," Jasmine interjected, disinclined towards any discussion or justification. "I do not require a transition period or any further formalities. The resignation is by mutual consent." She was fully aware of her rights, and her resolve remained unshakable. Faced with Jasmine's unyielding stance, Miss Jackson offered a resigned shrug. "Very well, I shall forward this to management, but I anticipate Mr. Vance will be exceedingly displeased." The intimation of impending turmoil was evident in her words. Jasmine offered no reply, merely a nod before departing the office. She felt liberated, as if heavy, unseen shackles had been cast off. The confines of her former professional environment now lay definitively behind her. Sterling awakened late, experiencing a mild headache and a disquieting sense of unease, akin to a persistent internal gnawing. The sun had climbed high into the sky, bathing their bedroom in an unusually bright light, and the customary bustle of Jasmine's morning routine was conspicuously absent. The residence exuded a palpable chill and emptiness. The familiar aroma of freshly brewed coffee and Jasmine's delicate citrus perfume had vanished, replaced by the lingering stale scent of the previous evening. It was the scent of his own personal downfall. He proceeded to the kitchen, expecting to find her there, but she was nowhere to be seen. A meticulously sealed envelope rested on the table. He opened it, read the resignation letter. It was concise, devoid of emotion, informing him of her departure and her decision to sever all contact. No explanations were offered, no accusations levelled, merely a stark, unvarnished statement of fact. The complete absence of sentiment from Sterling constituted the most damning indictment. "What in blazes?" he vocalized, the sound alien in the vacant apartment. "Is she serious? Is she upset about that foolish jest?" But it was merely a jest, a minor assertion of my public authority. His mind recoiled from the reality, attempting to reduce the situation to a trivial disagreement, a childish pique. He could not even distinctly recall the events of the preceding night. Alcohol had clouded his memory, yet fragments of the phrase "boring wife" and the mocking laughter of the room resurfaced, evoking irritation rather than remorse. Sterling attempted to contact Jasmine, but her phone number was unresponsive. He was incandescent with rage. How could she betray him in such a manner? Abandon him at such a critical juncture? The quarterly report, indispensable for his advancement, remained incomplete. All his vital analytical assessments, charts, and projections resided within Jasmine's intellect, in her meticulously kept notes, in her talent that he had so adeptly exploited without a second thought to its origin. It struck him with sudden, devastating clarity how utterly dependent he was on her unobtrusive, diligent efforts. This realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. Panic began to set in. It was the apprehension of a child whose training wheels had just been removed. Upon arriving at the office, Sterling made a direct beeline for his computer, attempting to navigate the files Jasmine had managed, opening one directory after another, each bearing labels such as VSCO3 2025 quarterly report. He discovered that numerous files were password protected, while others were in a state of disarray that rendered them incomprehensible without her explanations. These were not merely spreadsheets, but intricate webs of data, nascent models that appeared to him as a chaotic jumble of numbers, utterly meaningless and alien. A constricting panic began to seize his throat, an icy knot tightening around his lungs. He felt as though he were lost in a dense, dark forest, where each step risked plunging him into an abyss, with the compass and maps remaining in the possession of the very person he had carelessly driven away. The scent of the office, once evocative of his triumphs, now carried the aroma of paper and imminent financial ruin. "Miss Jackson has Mrs. Vance truly departed?" he inquired of the HR director, his voice betraying a barely concealed tremor as he attempted to impart a casual tone that deceived no one. A cold sweat beaded on his brow. "Yes, Mr. Vance, the resignation has been processed. She will not be present today. Incidentally, she requested that all documentation be finalized amicably, waiving the standard notice period." Miss Jackson responded curtly, closing her file and turning away. To her, he was merely another autocrat who had lost a valuable employee. But why? It was merely a jest. And the report, the quarterly report? Sterling's voice escalated, tipping into hysteria, revealing his utter desperation. "Mr. Vance, that falls outside my purview. I am simply performing my duties," Ms. Jackson replied dryly, closing her folder and averting her gaze. To her, he was but another pompous individual who had mislaid a valuable employee. Sterling wandered aimlessly through his office, attempting to reconstruct the fragmented data, but to no avail. His strength lay in presenting ideas, in eloquent discourse, in marketing concepts conceived by others. Without Jasmine, he proved utterly impotent, like a marionette with severed strings, a machine devoid of fuel. Every file, every line of code, every spreadsheet was inert to him without her elucidation, encoded with a cipher he could not decipher. He felt the very ground beneath him giving way. The life he had constructed upon the foundation of another's labor began to unravel. The division he had so proudly captained now resembled a precarious house of cards, threatening to collapse at the slightest breeze, with himself as its most vulnerable component. He spent hours fruitlessly searching for data that Jasmine could have retrieved in mere minutes. The cold sweat of impending failure slicked his forehead. His hands trembled and he nearly shattered the expensive designer lamp adorning his desk. Meanwhile, a devastating blow was executed with chilling precision. At her sun-drenched desk at CCG, Jasmine finalized her latest presentation. Within a mere few days, she had devised a strategy that not only exposed but also rectified Sterling's accumulated errors over the preceding years. She had transformed the client's unspoken grievances into clear, profitable resolutions. She experienced no elation, but rather a profound sense of calm satisfaction. It was the tranquility of a surgeon extracting a diseased molar. The repercussions were swift. Within a single week, following a series of meetings conducted by Jasmine alongside the Crestwood Capital Group team, Vanguard Equity Solutions' two largest clients, Golden Harvest Farms and Heartland AgriCorp, publicly announced their transition to Crestwood Capital Group. This was not merely an exodus, it was an exemplary defection driven by the sheer incompetence of their former provider, a catastrophic blow to Sterling's firm. They forfeited not only immense contracts, yielding substantial profits, but also a reputation meticulously cultivated over years, which now dissolved instantaneously. The entire industry buzzed with discussions of Crestwood Capital Group as the ascendant force capable of reshaping market dynamics, and of Vanguard Equity Solutions as a company losing its competitive edge and succumbing to obsolescence. Sterling became synonymous with a department head who had bartered his company's intellectual capital for a pittance. Panic descended upon Vanguard Equity Solutions. Chaos engulfed the finance division, which Sterling was utterly incapable of controlling. The financial figures failed to reconcile. Projections crumbled, investors grew apprehensive. Sterling, unable to complete the quarterly report, drifted between departments, attempting to deflect blame onto any target but himself. His complexion was sallow, his eyes burned with a feverish intensity born of sleeplessness and strain. He barely ate. His once impeccable attire hung loosely on his emaciated frame. Within days, he shed the aura of his former success. "How is this possible?" he bellowed at his subordinates, gesticulating wildly. "Do you not comprehend, Jasmine? I mean, we are facing significant challenges. Where is the data pertaining to these clients? Why did we lose them? Why was no one able to retain them?" He sought scapegoats, but found only bewilderment and helplessness reflected in the eyes of his staff. His subordinates could only offer shrugs. Without Jasmine's meticulously crafted systems, without her analytical brilliance, they were adrift. Her absence felt akin to the amputation of a vital organ. His division was paralyzed, and without his indispensable right hand, Jasmine, he had achieved nothing. The news of the loss of their key client served as the final devastating blow. He felt the office walls constricting, his lungs struggling to draw sufficient air, as if he was suffocating under the weight of his own failure. He was forced to brace himself against the doorframe to prevent collapse. The summons from his superior, Mr. Theodore Harrison, was terse and severe, sounding like a death knell. Not a flicker of his former politeness remained in his voice, only a glacial fury. "Mr. Vance, report to my office immediately and spare me any further prevarications. I require facts, not fanciful narratives." Sterling entered his boss's office, his legs feeling like jelly. Each step was an arduous struggle, as if wading through thick mud. Mr. Harrison sat rigidly at his desk, his expression unyielding, his eyes blazing with disappointment and wrath. An ominous folder bearing the Crestwood Capital Group insignia lay upon the desk, a stark and familiar mark of his disgrace. Adjacent to it were documents detailing the contracts with Golden Harvest and Heartland Agricorp, yet now bearing different stamps, different figures, and a markedly dissimilar level of detail. The room was permeated by the aroma of cold coffee and bitter defeat. "What precisely is transpiring here, Mr. Vance?" Mr. Harrison inquired, his voice deep and menacing, portending the arrival of a storm that had already broken. "We have relinquished 2 of our most substantial clients." 2? That amounts to losses in the tens of millions, which you have inflicted upon this company. These are reputational damages that no amount of money can rectify, and they have irrevocably eroded the trust of our partners. Can you provide an explanation? I demand a rational accounting. No more hollow pronouncements. He fixed Sterling with a piercing gaze that seemed to penetrate his very soul. Sterling commenced stammering something about inequitable competition, a challenging market environment, and Crestwood Capital Group engaging in predatory pricing, but his superior abruptly cut him off, his voice bordering on a shout, as he brought his fist down upon the desk with a resounding thud. The impact caused a nearby cup to rattle precariously. "Enough, Mr. Vance. That is a fabrication, and you know it. Observe this." He shoved the folder sharply across the desk. It slid across the polished surface directly into Sterling's grasp, like a venomous serpent drawing him towards an abyss. "This is your strategic proposal, the very report you presented to our former clientele. This is not predatory pricing. This is a brilliant analysis. This is a strategy that meticulously considers every infinitesimal detail, every subtle nuance that remained entirely beyond your comprehension. Do you recognize the distinctive handwriting?" Sterling seized the folder. He leafed through its pages, his eyes widening in sheer horror. The charts, the analytical evaluations, even the specific phrasing, the peculiar turns of expression he had so frequently heard from Jasmine but had previously dismissed, all of it was painfully familiar. This was a report that only Jasmine could have authored. Her inimitable style, her meticulous precision, her profound comprehension of financial mechanisms. It was her work, her very essence, her talent now being wielded against him, against the company that had so grievously wronged her, against his own once celebrated career. That is impossible," he choked out, a palpable lump forming in his throat, impeding his ability to breathe. "It is entirely possible, Mr. Vance, and furthermore, it is an established fact. You allowed a key employee to depart, an individual who, as it has transpired, was responsible for the entirety of your workload. All your lauded reports, your successful presentations, your strategic directives, that was her contribution. And now, that individual is employed by our adversaries, utilizing her intimate knowledge of our operations to bring about our downfall." Mr. Harrison's voice swelled with righteous indignation, his face flushed crimson. "You have utterly decimated her division. You have jeopardized the entire enterprise. Had you retained her talent, Mrs. Vance would have generated millions for us. Instead, under your stewardship, she has plunged us into the red. You dismissed her. You publicly humiliated her before the entire organization, and it transpires she was the sole individual sustaining your pathetic division. You have not merely lost an employee, you have surrendered the company's intellect. The cost of your jest has been the utter ruination of your career." Sterling attempted to articulate a response, but the words became lodged in his throat, refusing to emerge. His humiliation was absolute and complete. He recognized the futility of argument. Any utterance on his part would be nothing more than an empty echo. All his stratagems, his assumed accomplishments, his falsehoods, had collapsed in an instant, like a house of cards he had so painstakingly constructed upon the shoulders of others, upon the foundation of foreign ingenuity. "I have reached a decision, Mr. Vance!" Mr. Harrison declared, his tone shifting to a cold official pronouncement as if etched in granite. You are hereby terminated due to repeated incompetence, the egregious loss of a key employee, and the colossal damage you have inflicted upon the company's reputation and financial standing. Your position is already being filled by another individual, one whom I trust is less foolish and self-satisfied. You are to collect your personal belongings and vacate the premises within 1 hour. System access will be revoked immediately. And, Mr. Vance, you may consider any form of professional reference entirely out of the question. Your career within this industry, at least within this city, is definitively concluded. Sterling's world imploded. He exited his boss's office as if in a daze, feeling invisible to all observers. Each step was a heavy burden, as if navigating through treacherous mire. Colleagues, typically effusive and flattering, now averted their gazes, deliberately avoiding his. He overheard hushed whispers, caught the contemptuous glances directed his way. No one wished to acknowledge a man who just yesterday had basked in the spotlight, only to be utterly broken today. He, the accomplished department head, the pride of the division, was now a non-entity, an outcast, a man who had lost everything. His ascent through the ranks, his social standing, his reputation, all had disintegrated into dust overnight, the consequence of a single, foolish, cynical decision, a solitary, humiliating jest. Returning to the desolate apartment, Sterling felt a sharp, searing pain in his chest. He had lost not only his employment, not only financial security, but also Jasmine, his bedrock, his support system, the very individual who had propelled him to success, his unseen intellectual engine. Loneliness had taken up residence in his home. The apartment, once imbued with the gentle aura of Jasmine's presence, now reeked of mildew and stale air. The entire dwelling seemed to cast a condemnatory shadow upon him. Sterling wandered aimlessly through the rooms. He observed the empty expanse in Jasmine's closet, where her elegant attire had hung, and a wave of profound shock washed over him. He had not merely been left, he had been systematically erased. He ventured into the backyard and noticed the wet bar he had constructed, his personal monument to ego. It stood cold and inert. The chill seeped into his very bones. Miss Lois Jones stood by her fence, tending to her rose bushes. Their eyes met. She offered no greeting, but her gaze was one of such profound sadness and unspoken reproach that it nearly overwhelmed Sterling. It was the look of a judge who had long ago rendered her verdict, informed by the cycles of growth and decay she had observed over the years. He turned abruptly and retreated into the protective anonymity of the house. A paralyzing silence enveloped the apartment, which had once seemed welcoming, but now pressed against his temples, screaming of his isolation, of his absolute and unmitigated failure. He dialed her number repeatedly, only to be met with the indifferent, automated response of the answering machine. "The subscriber is currently unavailable," the voice intoned again and again, to no avail. She had irrevocably severed all ties. He attempted to leave voicemail messages, pleading and apologizing, but it was all in vain, far too late. He tried contacting mutual acquaintances and friends, those he considered within his social circle, but received no answers or only evasive replies. "Sterling, well, you understand the situation is rather awkward. You brought this upon yourself," one mumbled, and Sterling detected not sympathy in his voice, but an undercurrent of schadenfreude. "Apologies, I am genuinely occupied. Truly, I have no time at present." A swift retort confirmed Sterling's realization. He was no longer the esteemed Sterling, but merely Sterling, a man nobody desired. His reputation lay in tatters. Associates shunned a man who had so grievously wronged his company and publicly shamed his wife. The image of the successful Sterling was pulverized, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell. He had learned a harsh lesson in social degradation. Sterling sat in his vacant apartment, enveloped by a silence more deafening than any shriek or accusation. He replayed the events of the previous night, the boisterous room, his own smug countenance, then the arrival of Dr. Thorne, her decisive gesture, Jasmine's hand entwined with another man's, and the look of frigid fury on her face, a fury he had failed to comprehend at the time. He recalled the icy resolve in her eyes, an intensity he had then dismissed as insignificant. He remembered her late-night efforts, her calm explanations of intricate strategies, her unwavering faith in him, her steadfast devotion as his silent shadow. He had betrayed her, debased her, made a public spectacle of her, and was now paying the ultimate price. On the coffee table, where her cherished floral arrangements once graced their home with a semblance of warmth, lay a small, hastily scrawled note in Jasmine's hand, a note he had overlooked in his haste that morning. I wish you the same happiness you bestowed upon me. Ponder this. Now, in the oppressive quiet, those words echoed like a final verdict. He was adrift, hollow, facing an abyss of nothingness. He had orchestrated his own downfall. It was a cold, implacable retribution that had precipitated the utter collapse of his existence. Publicly disgraced, stripped of all his possessions, he was now compelled to endure the full measure of the solitude he had cultivated. He was utterly, irrevocably alone, consumed by the inferno of his own failure, with no one to offer salvation. The future loomed barren, terrifying, devoid of any hint of hope, a consequence of his own making. His life lay in ruins, and his only recourse was to wander aimlessly through the debris, recollecting how he alone had dismantled everything he possessed. He, Sterling Vance, the man who had forged a formidable career, was now bereft of everything. This was merely the prelude to his suffering, a stark, unyielding lesson on the genuine worth of affection and esteem. 2 months later, the crisp autumn gave way to a sharp, biting winter. Jasmine occupied her new office at CCG, the mastermind of her own destiny. Her team was devoted, her achievements irrefutable. The name Vance, once synonymous with Sterling, now represented nothing more than her industry-leading precision and unwavering strength. The air in her workspace was perfumed with the scent of polished wood, pristine glass, and the robust aroma of freshly brewed espresso. She had secured a modest, compact apartment, featuring a balcony overlooking a small, tranquil park. The furnishings were simple, yet they were entirely her own. Gone were the opulent velvets and the stifling weight of expectations. One Saturday afternoon, she returned to her former residence, not out of sentimentality, but to finalize a lingering obligation. She needed the last of her professional volumes, stored by Sterling in the garage. As she parked her vehicle by the roadside, she observed Miss Lois Jones tending to her garden, engrossed in her work amidst a carpet of fallen leaves and the stark, skeletal branches of rose bushes. Jasmine no longer harbored resentment. A faint, almost detached melancholy settled upon her, a wistful reflection on the wasted years. She approached the fence. Miss Jones! The elderly woman slowly straightened, her gaze, as sharp as ever, recognized Jasmine instantly. Surprise was absent, only a profound, silent satisfaction registered in her eyes. "Ah, Jasmine," she greeted, "I anticipated your return. I was expecting it." She gestured for Jasmine to enter her yard. The air was heavy with the scent of moist earth and the nascent promise of spring. "I've come to retrieve some books," Jasmine explained softly. "I also wanted to see you and express my gratitude. Your words were the catalyst." Miss Jones offered a smile that etched deeper lines around her eyes. "Every garden requires a winter, Jasmine. a period of austerity to foster new growth. Your winter has concluded, she added. You see, Jasmine, a rose that is left untended grows wild, expending its vitality on unproductive proliferation. Sterling was akin to such a rose, all ostentation, no substance, but you have liberated yourself and are now a plant establishing deep roots. She indicated a spot in the yard with her gnarled, earth-stained hand. Observe the fate of the wet bar. It stands empty, it is desolate. Indeed, Sterling is no longer present. Jasmine, Miss Jones continued, he has forfeited everything. That is the immutable law of the garden, Jasmine. You harvest precisely what you sow. He sowed solitude and will reap solitude, but you made a decisive severance and prepared the ground for something genuine. Miss Jones peered intently into Jasmine's eyes. How are you truly, Jasmine, not the architect, but the woman? Jasmine felt a welling of tears, the first in many months. These were not tears of sorrow, but of profound relief. I am alone but not lonely, she whispered. I have my work, which is intrinsically mine, and for the very first time I have discovered my own value. I am constructing my own foundation, and it is unshakable. That is rebirth, Miss Jones affirmed, placing a hand on Jasmine's arm, her touch surprisingly firm and warm. Never forget, young lady, the greatest fulfillment lies in being your own cultivator. Nurture your new roots. Retribution is merely the necessary pruning. Life itself is the subsequent growth. Do not fear the cold earth, Jasmine. It is the very cradle of existence. Jasmine nodded, comprehension dawning. The liberation had not stemmed from losing Sterling. The liberation was the discovery of her own inherent strength. With a smile that was both deep and genuine, she bid farewell to the elderly gardener and turned towards the house. The biting wind now felt cleansing rather than chilling. She was both the architect and the gardener. Her new life had commenced. 3 years later, the esteemed Justice Jasmine, now recognized as Dr. Jasmine Reed, stood on the stage of the annual Financial Congress. She eschewed the midnight blue velvet for a tailored grey pantsuit that exuded authority without being constricting. Her discourse focused not on financial figures, but on the blueprint for enduring success, a philosophy she herself had instilled at CCG. Her voice was clear, her presence commanding. She was the woman whose intellect had redefined the industry. As the applause faded following her address, Dr. Thorne approached. "Brilliant, Jazz!" he exclaimed. "We are immensely proud. That is true retribution, superiority, not annihilation." "Annihilation occurred organically," Jasmine replied softly. "I merely rearranged the structural components." She had been apprised of Sterling's situation. He had never recovered from his dismissal. He eked out a living as a consultant for small, unremarkable firms, battling mounting debts and desperately attempting to reconnect with his former network. He had learned that superficial illusions crumble without a substantive core. His loneliness had become so profound that he frequently sought solace at the dilapidated wet bar in his neglected garden, his sole refuge. It no longer bore the aroma of expensive scotch, but the musty odour of decaying wood and palpable despair. Nevertheless, Jasmine had orchestrated one final instructive gesture. With her significantly increased salary, now more than 3 times her previous earnings, she purchased the house Sterling had been forced to sell due to his financial straits. Her intent was not to reside there, but to bequeath it to Ms. Lois Jones. She drove to the house one last time. Ms. Jones was already by the fence, seemingly unfazed. "I heard you are the new proprietor," Ms. Jones remarked, a smile gracing her lips. "A most commendable action, Jasmine." "It is not a gift, Ms. Jones," Jasmine clarified. "It is a foundation, a launch pad for untapped potential. I intend to dismantle the wet bar and erect a modest library there, a sanctuary for young minds to pursue their studies undisturbed. A stark contrast to the place where Sterling had revelled in his ignorance. And the garden? Miss Jones inquired. The garden remains yours, Jasmine declared, a token of my profound gratitude and a symbol of renewal. You will impart there the lesson that life necessitates diligent cultivation, not superficial vanity. Miss Jones nodded, her eyes glistening. That is the most exquisite form of justice, Jasmine. What was once taken away now serves as an instrument for good. Life itself is the ultimate educational pursuit. Jasmine drove away, glancing in her rearview mirror. She observed Miss Jones in her small garden, poised to nurture new growth. She inhaled deeply. The sharp winds of success now felt like a warm embrace. She was no longer Sterling's overlooked wife. She was Dr. Jasmine Reed, the architect of her own existence and the tender of her own spirit. This was her authentic, immeasurable triumph. She had arrived. When I reflect now, I realize that sometimes life doesn't shatter you to break you. It cracks you open so you can finally perceive your true self. For years, I equated love with sacrifice and silence. I believed that strength meant enduring hardship no matter the cost. But the reality is, true strength isn't about withstanding pain. It's about possessing the courage to declare enough is enough. It's about extricating yourself from anything that diminishes your radiance, even when your heart trembles. Losing everything was the most beneficial event that has ever transpired in my life. Because within that loss, I discovered myself. I learned that serenity is not bestowed by others. It is cultivated internally, step by deliberate step, with every boundary established and every dream fiercely protected. Therefore, if you are listening at this very moment and feel ensnared, remember that your narrative is far from complete. You possess the capacity to commence anew. You can rebuild from the ashes and emerge stronger than before. My own life serves as tangible proof of this. If you resonate with my perspective and have found value in my story, please indicate your agreement by liking this video. I am genuinely curious to ascertain the collective reach of our audience. From which city and at what time are you listening? Share your location in the comments section, and if you wish to contribute to my ongoing journey, a small donation would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for your attentive listening and for sharing your invaluable time with me. For more life narratives of this nature, I encourage you to explore the other videos on my channel and subscribe. On the screen, you will find 2 new life stories that I am confident will touch your heart. Select one and begin listening immediately. With heartfelt affection, Betty.